Early this morning, Pfizer announced that its COVID vaccine is safe and effective in kids ages 5 to 11. According to their trials, children had a robust neutralizing antibody response and tolerated the vaccine well. This comes on the heels of the FDA's announcement that an advisory committee rejected plans to offer Pfizer's booster vaccines to a majority of the population. Instead, they approved a third shot only for those 65 years and older or otherwise at a high risk. It's important to note, though, the vote only represents a recommendation to the FDA by the committee and is not binding.
Meanwhile, unpublished data out of Israel shows evidence of the Pfizer vaccine's waning efficacy in its protection against mild, moderate, and severe disease, as well as hospitalization. The FDA is examining these latest numbers. Yesterday on Meet the Press, Dr. Fauci confirmed that a decision on whether or not boosters can be offered by Moderna or Johnson & Johnson should be made in a matter of weeks. There's a lot to unpack here. We know that vaccines work, but all indications are showing that they do wane in effectiveness over time. So it's interesting that the FDA then came out with this decision that they were not recommending boosters now. Do you think as the answer then, do we start inoculating children and hoping that gets us to a larger swath of the population? Because the variants are going to persist so long as you've got close to 50% of the population unvaccinated.
As we've talked about on this show before, when this debate gets down to children, it's going to make the previous argument about adults getting vaccinated look like a little garden party. Because at that point, now you are really talking about, in general, young people who have little risk from the infection. There have been more than 500 kids who have died of coronavirus in the U.S. That is one single death is too many. On the other hand, there's we're approaching hundreds of thousands of adults, and so the scale is radically different. Healthy children who get infected typically recover very quickly, and so parents are going to start weighing the risks of the vaccine. There had been some reports of heart inflammation, particularly among young boys. According to Pfizer data, which a lot of people don't want to trust, it's data from a for-profit drug company. Their trial showed that there was not serious risk of heart inflammation among young boys. But when I think a lot of parents and a lot of people are much more willing to take risks with themselves than they are willing to take risks with their children. And if the risk of COVID for children was higher, you'd have a lot more parents eagerly lining up their kids for vaccines. There will be a portion of the country that will rush out and get their kids vaccinated immediately. You'll have a lot of hesitancy, and then you'll have schools that debate vaccine mandates for kids, and that's where it's going to get the most toxic. You think that these school board meetings about masking got tense? Wait until it's about vaccinations.
I couldn't agree more. It's going to be unlike anything we've seen to date regarding mandates and vaccinations when we're talking about children. But the question I have is a few things. Why are we relying on Israeli data? Now, granted, the Israelis didn't.
It's absurd.
It's absurd. We've inoculated over 130 million people, so we would seem to have a good pool of evidence to pull from our own citizenry of what we should project. But
what the heck is the CDC doing?
What is the CDC doing?
They stopped even counting Delta. It's like.
And then the FDA, they made this recommendation against boosters, which is in conflict with the White House guidance. So why don't you come out and tell the American public why you're doing that? I'd love to know, because to me, it's much easier for me, intellectually to get on board, to your point, with myself as an adult or my, senior citizen mother getting a booster shot to protect herself. That's much easier for me to stomach than kids who have significantly lower risk of getting seriously ill from COVID.
Yeah, no, it's completely outrageous that we're so bad at governing the richest country on the planet, that we're relying on Israel, which cut mostly an exclusive deal with Pfizer. So all of our data that we're relying on is just Pfizer data, when here in the United States, we're using Johnson & Johnson and Moderna as well. And so we're just flying blind on that one because Israel didn't happen to use Moderna and Johnson & Johnson as well. We can do this. It's a collective decision to be this incompetent.
And the part that's hard for me is we're still at about 2,000 deaths a day. I hate to, there's no comparisons, but you could think of it like the number of deaths of a 9/11 every single day because of this virus. And we still have this broad swath of the country that does not trust the vaccine. They feel like their heads are spinning by the guidances they're being given by the government. I'm somebody who, I do trust it. I trust the science, but I understand why people are so hesitant, because you seem to have conflicting guidances coming, the White House, the FDA. No one knows what the hell the CDC is even doing throughout this. And, I know you all talked about it a bunch last week, but moving to mandates rather than public education to me seemed a bit concerning, because a lot of the hesitancy around this comes from the fact that people feel like it's political. And what's been lacking from the public discourse in the U.S. on this has been, why don't we have President Biden standing shoulder to shoulder with Ron DeSantis and saying, we don't agree on virtually anything except that getting vaccinated is the safest way to keep our country open, to make our hospitalizations go down, and to make deaths go down. But nobody's willing to do that. They're not willing to have these tough leadership conversations that take politics out of it. And instead, we're moving to, confusing mandates that I think half of them are going to get tied up in court, so they're not going to have a substantial impact on the percentage of people vaccinated. And now we're opening the floodgates with what will be a complete disaster of if we start requiring kids to get vaccinated, because that will really drive a certain segment of the population to be very angry.
And the reporting around the access to the vaccine for children is that it could be, if all goes as it went for the adult approval, that it could be approved by Halloween, is what they're saying. So we have new Hill-HarrisX data on the public's willingness to get booster shots. Let's take a look at that.
They came up with a recommendation, which I think is a good recommendation, because if you look at everyone over 65 and people from 18 to 64 with underlying conditions that make them more likely to have a severe outcome, and those who are 18 to 64 who by either institutional or occupational situation put them at a higher risk for exposure and infection, you're going to get a pretty good chunk of the population. So I don't think they made a mistake. But the one thing I think people need to realize, that data are coming in literally on a daily and weekly basis.
The poll found 70% of voters said they'd take a booster shot if necessary. That's down slightly from 76% in a May survey. Roughly the same amount of voters said they are not getting vaccinated at all, at 12%. 87% of Democrats and 71% of independents said they'd get another jab if needed, consistent with the last poll. The number of Republicans who said they'd get a booster shot has decreased from 67% in May to 55% in the latest survey. Alyssa, why are the numbers headed in that direction, you think?
I think people have whiplash from the government's just kind of back and forth on guidances. And I think that people are sick of COVID. And sometimes I think that mentally and intellectually takes form. And I don't want to do anything more. I feel like the government should have handled it better by now. Not a valid position, though. Let's just be clear. That isn't a valid position. I think that there is going to have to be a public push from our federal government to encourage people if we do go the route of booster shots, because I'm actually surprised by how high these numbers are. I would think they would be even lower than they are. There's certainly, Republicans, especially the numbers are lower with, but I think that there's going to need to be an element of public education. And what I would, if I were advising the Biden administration, which I'm certainly not, they need to switch the messaging. The whole it's not about freedom with the mandates, that's the wrong message. The message should have been getting vaccinated is the best way to get back to living freely, to not having lockdowns, to not having mask mandates, to being able to fly, to be able to travel to Europe and have people come in. That's I think would resonate with a lot more folks if you say that this is the safest way to get back to your normal life as we knew it before COVID, rather than basically saying I'm getting frustrated with you and mandates aren't in fact about freedom.
Right, but what if people just went back to their normal lives without it? Which happened in a lot of the country.
That is true.
Hey, thanks for the offer, but I'm already living my normal life without,
Yeah, and again, I think this goes back to there needs to be more of a public education around how, not just assessing your personal threat by COVID, but the threat you potentially pose to others, and really breaking down that confusion. Because you can have conversations with, I'm sure, people in your social circles, and I do in mine, who don't even seem to understand at times how the virus spreads, how, someone being unvaccinated could in fact pose a risk to vaccinated people if they're carrying a variant. But there's such a lack of trust right now in our elected officials, our appointed officials, that I'm not sure that would break through, but that would be my probably best advice.
And you're right, the public rollout of the booster policy was a mess. So you have Fauci and the Biden administration saying everybody's going to get boosters pretty soon. And when you tell people that they're getting boosters, they're like, oh, well, that means that the 2 shots that I got already must not be working. That's what people hear when they hear they're getting a booster. Then they can actually, you know what, it is working okay for people under 65, so you don't need a booster. But for 65 and over, and asking people to absorb that whiplash and all of that nuance, and asking people to understand that, yes, that as the vaccine wears off after a particular amount of time, what they mean by wear off is that it goes from 90+% effective down to 70+% effective. And we don't know where it goes after that. But when people hear wear off, they hear, well, it doesn't work anymore, it's gone.
Right.
And so that's a public health messaging problem that's been created.
Well, and another confusing thing about this virus, again, and it's a totally novel pathogen that we're still learning about and don't know everything about, but a lot of people who've been vaccine hesitant are so because they know they have antibodies, because they had the virus and they're now saying, well, I'm inoculated against it because I do. Sarah Palin actually made this point over the weekend and was praised by some, criticized by others, because that's the nature of the debate around vaccines. But it's actually the same thing where she may be protected right now with antibodies, but antibodies also wear off in their efficacy against protecting you, and it's usually about 6 months. So again, these are the kind of conversations we need to be having as an American people who have a duty to each other about what risk you have, but also that you pose to others if you choose to not get vaccinated.
Right. And tomorrow on Rising, The Verge investigations editor Josh Ziza joins to give all the details on a new coalition of New York City delivery workers.
Plus, friend of the show and national politics reporter from The Hill, Julia Manchester, is back for the latest in D.C. politics. Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss a video.
See you tomorrow.
See you guys.